Well, so let's also talk about a big focus of the Belt and Road is the digital aspect, the digital Belt and Road. And that ties into Chinese telecom Huawei creating smart cities. This is sort of a big thing that they're doing in Africa. But, you know, the United States has been trying to create a global pushback against Huawei. So why is this Huawei digital Belt and Road so significant to the Chinese Communist Party?
So if you can control all of what people say, just look at the United States, if you can control what people say, then you can stop them from saying anything that, you know, this is authoritarianism 101. You can stop them from doing anything. Well, in Africa, for example, the biggest phone companies in Africa are now Chinese phone companies. And the reason why they're more likely to buy a Chinese phone is because China undercuts the price. So charges them less than it costs to even make the phone. Why would they do that? They want to do that because they want to have everybody to have a Chinese phone. They want to be on their system. And they want them plugged into their internet so that they can listen. They built this big, like CIA, NSA type of place in Guizhou province. It's huge. It's massive. And they're collecting people's DNA. They're collecting their voice. They're collecting their records. If they can take information from people all over the world and hold on to that information, they can control you.
Well, you know, some people listening might be like, wait, they're taking our DNA, but like this has actually come out. The what was the name of the company with the prenatal tests?
BGI?
BGI, yeah. One of the most popular prenatal tests in the world. And that information goes back to China. They are collecting DNA from a lot of people around the world.
A lot of when COVID hit, BGI started going around to different countries offering PCR tests.
Kind of this vaccine Belt and Road.
And then they also offered to build testing facilities in country. They offered in the U.S., they offered California, a number of other states to build testing facilities for them for PCR tests. And then the U.S. Federal government was like, do not take that money. You are not allowed to. But if they hadn't stepped in, I mean, California bought $3 billion worth of masks from China. I mean, I don't see that they necessarily would have not accepted this Chinese, like bio
Trojan horse.
Well, I wasn't going to say Trojan horse, but like this company, right, that has an interest in collecting all of this DNA data from the U.S. and other places, because like data is power now. And California might not have said no.
How about 23andMe, Ancestry.com? You know, how much money, I always say, how much money is your life worth? You know, or your belief or your company worth? You know, how much can I buy you for? If you give 23andMe or Ancestry.com billions more than they could possibly ever imagine in their lifetime, and China can do it easily, and then they have everybody's DNA that was sent into those agencies. Imagine it wouldn't be that difficult to get a lot more data. The question is who's going to stop them and whether or not they can, take those deals or shuffle off some of that data underground so that people don't know. I would like to think that there isn't a price tag on my head. Which is why I continue to write books, even though I know it's dangerous. But I know that there are other people who don't. I have people who have been around my office who will not have their name or information shown. They'll help me, but they will not. They don't want to be involved. They don't want China to know anything because they're afraid. And I think this is going to happen more and more. Once someone feels that their life is or their family's life is in danger, they will no longer do anything or say anything against China, which is what's happening in Hollywood and what's happening in Silicon Valley. And, there are a lot of places where people are not willing to say anything against China.
this really is. It shows the terror of the alternate Chinese system that the Communist Party is trying to set up. I don't even want to call it Chinese. It's just a communist totalitarian state that's influencing the entire world. However, so the Belt and Road, it on paper, it's this infrastructure investment project, and it is creating this horrible alternate system that, someday the Chinese Communist Party, you could use it to dominate the world. But
someday.
Well, it's well on the way. But, a lot of the world does need infrastructure development. If China obviously was able to step into a market where there was a big need for it, why did this vacuum exist that the Chinese Communist Party was so able to exploit?
They can produce items cheaper than anyone else in the world. If you're using slave labor, it doesn't take a lot of math to figure out that if you have to pay someone $15, $20 an hour in the United States and it costs $0 an hour there, then it's a whole lot cheaper to produce something, right? So once you have that ability to manufacture at very reduced cost, and you're willing to take a hit, like we were talking about Africa, you're willing to sell phones to everybody in Africa for less than the cost of the phone. Or you probably read in the news this solar panels. So they're producing these solar panels that I guess are very difficult to produce. So doing it in Xinjiang, and they're selling them at less than the cost of making them, so that no other company wants to go into that market. You were saying a vacuum, but the vacuum is created because if China can get everybody out of the marketplace because they can undercut all other competitors, then there's a vacuum. Like they're the only one. They have a monopoly. And so they're trying to create monopolies in certain areas so that the other countries don't get involved in the manufacturing.
Which is possible because the Chinese Communist Party doesn't need to be accountable to the Chinese people. Like we just did an episode recently about the dams that have been breaking in China after the recent flooding. And we quoted one official who was saying that most dams in China are old and in desperate need of repairs, but there's just no money to do that. However, there is what's the Belt and Road price tag? $4 trillion?
I mean, that's not real.
That's not real, but
I mean,
it's in the hundreds of billions.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's not like the United States where like every time there's any amount of foreign aid, you get like a bunch of people saying, hey, why are we sending money to a foreign country?
Right. I mean, also, what you were talking about with the undercutting with the phones or the solar panels, they do with infrastructure as well. They will go in and bid on a port in Greece and offer much lower, like they'll offer a higher price. They will do it for less than, or they will bring in and operate it for less than anybody else. Like they will basically make it so that financially they are the only choice.
Yeah. I mean, when you were in Greece, the port of Piraeus, the whole they'd
taken over half of it by that point. But
yeah.
But like a Chinese company came in and it was a stand-up company and they were like, we can run this, and Greece gave them a really long lease for it, and they were like, they brought in Chinese workers
and undercut the Greek workers.
Yeah. And but that meant that they could do it much more efficiently, and the government didn't have to pay that much.
Yeah, and they didn't have to deal with safety standards or overtime. It's
or environmental protections.
Yeah.
In a lot of countries, China's gone in and built these power plants and destroyed the rivers, so people can't even use their rivers anymore. The same way it is in China. The rivers are you can't swim in China's rivers, but you can't swim in the rivers in a lot of other places either, because China doesn't have any environmental protections. They say it's up to the country to handle the environment. We're just going to build these with all of the drainage and toxic waste going into the rivers. And this is a problem everywhere, Africa in particular, but Hungary, I just read a report about the rivers in Hungary. It's just as bad there.
It's interesting, the river pollution is one example of an externality, right? It's like a a company goes in and they take advantage of some aspect of the natural environment or the society or whatever that they don't pay for, but the true cost of production or development has these externalities, these spillovers into other aspects of the environment or society or politics, etc. So beyond just the river pollution, what are some of the other externalities that we see when Chinese companies come in and into Africa, undercut the local markets, and start to dominate in certain sectors?
I think, well, certainly the air, if we want to stay on the environmental side. But I'll take another one that's kind of interesting in the China-Pakistan economic corridor. So they've built this train from Xinjiang down to Gwadar. And in Gwadar, they have because they use all Chinese workers. In Gwadar, they have a Chinese, we'll call it encampment or city. And they created this barbed wire fence around like a chunk of the city where they had built living spaces for the Chinese. So another externality is that going into Africa, I gave the example of Pakistan, that little Chinese cities are being walled off inside another country that the country can no longer use because it's got 10,000 employees from China. And they don't want the Chinese to leave. So the reason why the barbed wire is not to protect the people, it's because the Chinese workers could try to leave, even though they do take their passport. To prevent them from escaping, they wall off the whole area, which makes the people in the country completely annoyed. Can you imagine if in your city, they walled off a place for 10,000 people and you weren't allowed to use your parks anymore or wherever, this was located?
Well, that reminds me of what happened in Cambodia, right? In Sinukville, where they had a bunch of like Chinese companies come in to do development. And then they basically created this kind of space where the Chinese mafia moved in because casinos moved in and then brought essentially terrible crime.
This sounds like Vancouver as well.
And human trafficking.
Yeah.
But also, interestingly, like in Sinukville in Cambodia, they're building casinos, but it's illegal in most cases for Cambodian people to gamble or to own casinos. And so they basically created the space where essentially there's a different jurisdiction, right? It's almost like a Chinese jurisdiction that's under kind of China's rules, run by China's enforcers, which in that case are basically the triads or the mafia that are generally controlled by the party, even though they're sort of on their own. And then approved by the corrupt dictator. In the case of Cambodia, Hun Sen is one of those presitators who is elected, and rules with way too much power. And so, like, just imagining this now in like Gwadar in Pakistan and like all over Africa and the countries that we can't even name because there's like.
I think South Africa had this controversy because they wanted Chinese police to come in to to kind of police some of these areas where there were basically these Chinatowns.
Oh,
and
that
so
sounds good.
they're state-owned companies, and then it was kind of, I don't remember all the details now because it's been a few years, but there was a big controversy over whether they didn't call it the Chinese police would come in, but they called it cooperation, right?
Oh, win-win mutual cooperation.
I love cooperation.
Where essentially these places could be under Chinese jurisdiction. What you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.